Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Ask an Expert Navigating 2022, the Importance of Strategic Planning. Please be advised that we are recording the session and we want to let attendees know that any questions you ask in the chat function will also be recorded. My name is Tiffany Boning. I am an Economic Development Officer with the County of Simcoe, and I will be your moderator for this morning's session. The Planning Committee and Ask an Expert series is led by the County of Simcoe. Over the last 2 years, we have been able to bring organizations throughout the county some excellent content as you navigate the current environment. I encourage you to keep an eye out for future webinars. We have a lot of great content coming your way. Also, thank you to the regional partners who have assisted us with these webinars. The Small Business Center of Barrie, Simcoe County and Aurelia, South Georgian-based Small Business Enterprise Center, the Aurelia Area CDC, Nottawasaga Futures, North Simcoe Community Futures Development Corporation, Community Futures, South Georgian Bay, Sandbox Center, and Georgian College. Prior to today, several of you shared questions with us. These were provided to our guest expert, and many of these responses have been incorporated into his presentation. However, we are also hoping to have an opportunity for questions during the demonstration, as well as at the end of the session. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the chat function. You will find the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation as well. I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to facilitate today's session on strategic planning. We have an excellent presenter and expert with us today to share the steps and considerations for strategic planning. A little bit about our presenter, Brian Faulkner. Brian is a seasoned business leader with over 30 years of experience in the global engineering and construction industry. In 2014, Brian initiated a business management consulting practice with a particular focus on organizational performance assessments, innovative approaches to strategy, development, and planning, facilitation of planning-focused workshops, establishing visible metrics to track progress towards goals, executive coaching and mentoring for transformation and sustainable success, succession planning, and transition management. In addition to his practical experience leading large and complex businesses, Brian is a skilled facilitator and leadership coach who has a tremendous passion for helping people achieve transformative change. As the primary strategic planning facilitator, Brian leads his clients through a well-established process that has successfully delivered transformative results for a range of organizations in sizes varying from 10 to 2,500 employees and with annual budgets up to and exceeding $500 million. Welcome, Brian. Please take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Tiffany, and welcome to all of you today. I did want to quickly introduce Jackie Faulkner, who is my daughter, my business partner, and my boss, because she's the president of Thrive State. She's going to be watching the chat in case I happen to miss any of your questions that come up.
Morning, everyone.
So today we're going to be talking about strategic planning, and I know we've branded the session as why and why it's important in 2022, especially. Actually, the content of the presentation is largely about how, and so we're going to spend quite a bit of time speaking about how to do a good strategic plan, some of the pitfalls and how to mitigate them. And then I think very important at the end, there'll be an abbreviated example. All of you should have received a copy of the presentation in the form of a handout, as well as some templates. And if you have those at your side, you can work along in thinking about your own organization as we go through, especially during the example. So, strategic planning, why bother? And I want to make it clear from the beginning that this isn't about putting a tick in the box that I've done my planning and now I can go on with my business, and just something that you would put on the shelf and ignore. It's actually to have a working document, a tool that will help propel your business towards your goals and your dreams for your business or your organization. I've heard a lot of reasons. As a matter of fact, I've used some of these reasons in my own history as to why not do strategic planning. there's probably 4 categories of reasons that I hear. A very common one is we're just too busy. We're too busy doing our business or doing our function of our organization. We don't have time to set aside for a planning process. There's also the argument that if I make a plan, it's going to be restrictive. It's going to be like handcuffs on my ability to be flexible, because I'm going to have to follow this plan, and I can't predict the future. Is kind of the third thing. So how is it really going to be effective? Maybe you've had some experience, or people have had experience with a strategic planning process that didn't seem to make any change, and so it makes them somewhat jaded and skeptical. And I think the fourth reason is just complacency. I like things the way they are, and if I plan for a change, I'm actually going to have to make a change and put effort into it. So those are kind of common reasons that I've heard, and you probably can relate to some of them as well. The result, though, of not having a strategic plan is that your business or your organization will tend to grow in a haphazard way. Just as things happen, it'll be just by good luck and fortune if things go well, and if you have blind spots and things, you might get surprised in a nasty way as well. So it's a great reason to have a strategic plan, and here are some of the good reasons. I think it's true for, I'm guessing, for most of the people in the participating today, and for most businesses actually around the world, that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a big impact on your organization. It could be in terms of your customers and how they've been impacted. Maybe it's the supply chain side of your business. It could even be in the way you deliver your services, or the kind of services that you need and products you need to offer. So coming out of COVID-19, which hopefully we are close to, it's a great time to reassess and just see who are we now as we come out of this pandemic, and what's changed, what have we learned about ourselves, and how might the future look different going forward. Another thing about strategic planning is that it's an opportunity for leaders to get out of the trenches and work on the business instead of in the business. Very common problem. I like to use the analogy of being in the field or being on the balcony overlooking the field. And taking this time away to do some strategic planning can change your paradigm. It's a great alignment tool, and I think, if I was honest, in my years of experience with strategic planning, it's probably the most powerful part of it is that as you come out of a strategic planning process like this one, your leadership team is aligned, and you've got everyone pulling in the same direction, knowing what their role is in the process, and with that you can get amazing progress and results. There's an impact as well on your day-to-day operations, in the sense that it'll help people to know what to say yes to and what to say no to. So there's an efficiency aspect to it. And maybe what to say no to can be one of the most important things. If something's not aligned, it can avoid rabbit holes that you might otherwise go down. And as far as the argument about, well, we don't know what the future holds, if you have a plan, it's a better place to start if things change, and when things change, because they will. It's still better to be starting with a plan than to be starting with no plan as things change. Bottom line is that if you want tomorrow to look different than today, and you have an idea what you want tomorrow to look like, the way to get there is with a strategic plan. And you've probably heard this quote before, but a goal without a plan is really just a dream. Not to say that dreams aren't important. It's just, if you want to make progress, you need a plan. So there's some reasons why to do some planning. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So this is the planning process that we follow. It's very simple. You look at it, there's nothing revolutionary there. So there's 4 steps. You know, where are we now? Where do we want to be? How are we going to get there? And how are we going to monitor our progress? If there's any magic sauce in this process, I would say it's steps 3 and 4, answering those questions and acting on those questions, because what that does is takes the process from just generating ideas to actually thinking about how are we going to achieve those ideas and putting them into action plans and then monitoring and following those plans. In my experience, that's the key to actually having a successful strategic planning session. Now, as we go through the session today, I'm going to be referring to the perspectives of a balanced scorecard. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, balanced scorecard has been around for about 30 years. It was developed by a professor at Harvard University back in the early 90s. And it's a way to look at an organization, not just businesses, but really any organization, as you're looking at its current condition or your goals for it in 4 perspectives, from 4 perspectives, excuse me. So there's a financial perspective, and I've listed the things. I won't read the slide, but the financial perspective, the customer perspective, your internal processes perspective, and then the organizational capacity perspective. By looking at those 4 different perspectives as you're thinking about your organization as it stands today, or where you want it to be in some point in the future, it means that you're taking a balanced view of the organization. And what will frequently happen is that in a business, for-profit business, there can be an overemphasis on the financial aspects of the business, and an underemphasis on, say, internal processes and your capacity, because they cost money, and your focus is all on your customers and your how you're doing financially. On the other hand, in a not-for-profit, it can be very common to be focused on your customers, and in that case, it's the people you're providing your service to, your clients. Or if it's a religious organization, your parishioners or whatever, you focus on them and what programs can we offer and how can we help, without maybe enough focus on the financial side or the capacity side. And I would say that the capacity, organizational capacity perspective tends to be what gets missed in a lot of strategic planning processes. And so you end up with not enough capacity in terms of your people and your infrastructure. So we're going to be looking at these 4 perspectives as we go through. So I thought it was important to just establish what they were at the start. The other thing is, a common question is, who should participate if we do a strategic planning process? And it depends on your organization. If it's a 1-person organization, guess what? It's you. But if it's a larger organization, with managers and even executives, you would want those decision makers to be part of the process, and as well as, say, process owners within the business, subject matter experts, especially if you've identified some specific areas that you need to focus on. And the last one is I've experienced it's very powerful actually to have what I call diversity participants, meaning people that maybe don't belong in the room from any of the above 4 bullet points, but they can bring a different perspective than everyone else, and it can add a lot of value. As an example, in one of my leadership roles was leading a 2,500 person organization. It was an engineering company. so significant operation. But we included some new grads in our planning process because they had such a different paradigm than all of the more seasoned people that were around the table, and it helped add a different perspective. So I don't know what that means in your paradigm, but think about that as well, to have some diversity participants in your sessions. Any questions before we get into the first step of the process? Okay, so the first thing you want to answer in our 4-step process is, where are we now? And I think if we're honest, if you've been in your organization for any length of time, you will be a little bit of a frog in the boiling water syndrome. It just happens where you get used to things the way they are, and you may not see the things that somebody from outside might see, for instance, or if you step back yourself and had a look. So this is what it's about. The first step in the process is really having a fresh eye review of your business. And it starts with looking at metrics for your organization, or the performance in different areas. You can see that I've listed the 4 areas of the balanced scorecard, because again, it gives you that rounded, balanced view of how you're doing. So you look at how you're doing in those areas, and maybe over the last several years, it's great if you can have some trends and how things have been going in the recent past. Stakeholder feedback is invaluable. It can really help you get past some of your own scotomas about how you think about, how the leadership thinks about their organization might be very different than their customers or their workers in the organization. So getting that internal and external feedback is critical. It could be in the form of just a dialogue, anecdotal type feedback, or it could be in terms of survey work, focus groups if you're a larger organization and you want to get a sampling, either internally or externally. But getting that feedback is really important. And once you've done that, then you can actually do a proper SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that the business takes or has is a way to summarize kind of where you are in the context of the information that you've sussed out. And typically, you would have that done by the leadership team. Again, if it's a small organization, it might just be you that needs to do that, but it's a worthwhile exercise. And once you've done that, it's a really good time to reassess your current mission, vision, and values. What you might find is that who you are has actually changed from who you thought you were when you started your organization, or when you last look at your mission, vision, and values. I'm going to talk a bit more about mission, vision, and values on the next slide. But the point of answering this first question of where are we now is that it gives a really good baseline for the rest of the process. And if you're in an organization that has leaders that have responsibilities in different areas, so a little bit larger organization, what you'll find is that some leaders will have a lot of knowledge in one area, the area they're responsible, presumably. So you'll have your finance, your controller will know all about the finance side, and your operations manager will have a lot of information on that side, and so on. By doing this, where are we now exercise and communicating it, having those people actually communicate and participate in it, it helps bring everyone in the process to the same baseline. So they're working with the same paradigm, and it'll help smooth things as you go further. I just want to make a couple more comments about the mission, vision, and values part of this. Your mission is about who you are, like what is your reason to exist. So it's what do you do, who do you serve? What is the benefit that you provide? And what are your differentiators that why should you exist as opposed to one of your competitors or other service people offering the similar sort of service? And I can't overemphasize that this needs to be really clear before you continue in the process. If you're not sure about why you exist and what it is you're trying to do, you won't be effective in the rest of the process. The vision is just your North Star. And I'm talking about a vision statement type of thing. And it describes what you'll look like when your mission is complete, which your mission will never be complete, but it's that ideal. And then the values is about how you will act as you're executing your mission. So, it's the way we'll behave as we interact internally and externally. The values you'll recognize, they just happen, but if you state them and list them out, what your desired values are, it can help you actually achieve those values. And I want to just comment that the mission, vision, and values of an organization tend to be really stable. They're your DNA. So you don't need to look at these every year in a strategic planning process, except for to reassess, are we still aligned with that? And if you're not, if there's been a different direction that the organization has taken, then it's time to reassess them. But typically you don't need to do that unless maybe every 5 years or so. Okay, any questions before we go to step 2? Good, I hope everybody's still with us. Oh, I had some 2 examples, one from a very large organization and one from a very small organization. So Google, their mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. Their vision is access to the world's information in one click. And their values are put the user first, speed is a virtue, set audacious goals, and so on. You can see them there. On the other end of the spectrum is Thrive State. That's Jackie and myself and the people we collaborate with. Our mission is we help busy leaders transform their organizations and workplace performance. Our our vision is a world where everyone loves going to work on Monday morning. And our 4 key values are be authentic, add value, be generous, and be collaborative. So that's the kind of thing that I would encourage you to have for your organization. And it can make sure that your plans are aligned with who you are and who you want to be. Second question is, where do you want to be? Any journey has a start and an end point. And for the strategic planning process, it's the same thing. You want to know, where do you want to be? I like this quote from the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which way you go. So you need to know where it is you're heading. So to determine that, you want to quantify in a visionary sense where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. I personally am not, for this kind of process, I don't think you need to look more than 5 years out. It is too unpredictable. 3 years is actually, I think, really good. It's a good horizon, and up to 5 years. Again, you would look at where you want to be in the 4 dimensions of the balanced scorecard. So, where do you want to be in your financial performance, the customers, who do you want to be having as your customers by then? What services would you be offering to them? Are you going to be in more geographic areas? And what are your delivery methods going to be? All of those kind of things for your customers, your internal capacity, and your internal processes. Doing a good job on where you want to be is what aligns your organization, especially if you do a good job of communicating it once you've established it. Now, I mentioned the zone of sensible excitement. That's a phrase that I picked up from Jim Collins, the Good to Great guy, and I think it's a very valid concept. Meaning, when you do your vision session for 3 to 5 years, it's fun to have audacious dreams, And I encourage that. But at the end of the session, what you want to do is say, okay, what's the zone of reasonable, of sensible excitement? What could we achieve? It's stretching, but we have a reasonable chance of achieving it, and pull things into that zone. People will really get behind it if they think, hey, we've got a chance, we could actually do this. In our process, we use a tool called the ideal versus real gap analysis. And this is where it would fit in. As you finish up with question 2, where do I want to be? If you use this tool, it lets you kind of compare the questions 1 and 2. Where do we want to be and where are we today? The ideal and the real. So you list them, and again, I recommend to do it in terms of a balanced scorecard perspectives, and you do a gap analysis. What are the gaps between where I want to be and where I am today? So if it's revenue, excuse me, I apologize. If it's revenue, do we want to double our revenue in 5 years? In what size of a gap, meaning how big of an effort will it take to do that? And once you've done that, then you can go through and prioritize your ideals versus real as well. Like how impactful are they? So you might have something that's a big gap, but closing that gap wouldn't have a huge impact, so it would be a lower priority. We're going to see this worked out in some detail when we get to the example at the end of the session. The third, any questions before we go to the third step?
There's a question that I'm going to hold till the end of, before we do the example.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So the third question is, how will we get there? So you know where you are today, you know where you want to be, but how are you going to get from here to there? And as I mentioned at the start, this is the really critical part of strategic planning process if you want it to be impactful. And we don't want to have the attitude of this team here, or this leader here, which was, 2-part strategy: locate the hills and then head for them.
Brian, you're muted.
Yes.
Oh, just to pause before you keep going, there was a question in the gap analysis about how do you assess if it's a 0 or a 10 or anywhere in between.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the gap, it's a strictly subjective process. So it's not a mathematical formulation or anything. It's what is the consensus of the people around the table as to how big of a gap is that, and it's in terms of what's the effort going to be that would close that gap. And again, I think when we get to the example, you'll see it'll help to bring that up, because we're going to look at a whole bunch of examples in the 4 dimensions of the balanced scorecard. Okay, the third step in the process is answering the question, how are we going to get there? And it's to specify and be really clear about what are we going to do starting like now or in the starting of your execution cycle. Which, by the way, my recommendation would be to do this in advance of your fiscal cycle so that you can incorporate into your annual fiscal plan any costs associated with your initiatives. Okay, so there are really 2 things that you want to work on here: your strategic initiatives and your action plans that come out of those. And the action plans need to include responsibilities, like who's going to be doing the actions or be responsible for the actions, making sure they get done. Who are the stakeholders and how are you going to communicate to them, and how are you going to measure your progress? And this is where I provided the strategic initiative template that came to you. Okay, and again, this is where the process, in my experience and observation, is where the planning process often derails. People come away from a vision casting session all enthused and excited about the future, but they didn't take it to the action planning level, and therefore nothing happens or very little happens after the session is over. The common question that I hear is, what's the difference between an initiative and an action? And an initiative is essentially broader in scale than a single action. It should be something that's not business as usual. So, if you're already doing it, you don't really need an initiative for it. You might just need to, to improve it somewhat, but not business as usual. It's going to have a significant impact. And again, broader than a single action. If it's a single action, like a rifle shot, then just do it. You don't need a big plan for that. What's really great is if it can be measurable. So if the outcomes of it can be measurable, because that will allow you to track how you're doing against initiatives. And the last step in the process is monitoring the progress. And I think this is my favorite cartoon of all time, because I'm a planner by nature, and you always have this beautiful plan, smooth path from here to my goal, and then there's reality. And I think this reality, these are probably 3 of the COVID waves or something like that, and how it impacted your path. But it doesn't change who you are, the guy on the bicycle, and it doesn't change where you want to be. It's just that things change along the way, and you have to be able to adapt to that. That's why you monitor and adjust as you go along. So the steps or the things you do as part of this step is regular review of your plans, of your action plans. Follow up on the accountabilities with the people who have responsibilities in those plans. Report the results out to the stakeholders. It's pretty powerful if you hold yourself accountable to the progress that's being made to the stakeholders in the organization. And by stakeholders, I mean, it could be the ownership of the organization. It could be the workers in the organization. It might even be your clients if you've made commitments to them. Reporting is a very important accountability tool, in my opinion. And then you need to make course adjustments. As I've said, if your plans are not working, you need to change your plans so that they do work. So this is where the flexibility of planning comes in. And at least annually, I would recommend to recalibrate. So typically, we would do a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, but recalibrate every year to see what progress have we really made, what initiatives would carry over, and have we done any changes along the way. What gets measured gets done. It's the old truism. Now, I've just put in a couple examples of reporting mechanisms. So this is a dashboard. So you can see your four perspectives of a balanced scorecard, and what are you measuring? So you set your goals for an initiative, in this case of improving your financial management, and that was around improving the company's AR. This is an actual one from one of my clients, or our clients, scrubbed to protect the innocent. Anyway, you get the idea. It's a very visual way, on one sheet of paper, that you can show how each of your initiatives are doing. And typically this would be done on a quarterly basis. This is most important if you have stakeholders that need to be reported back to. If it's just you and your organization, you can review these. You don't need to spend the time putting together a dashboard. And then you can also present at a much greater detail for each one of those gauges, what's behind it. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you get the idea. Any questions before I go into the common pitfalls and mitigating measures? Okay. So there are a few things that can happen in a strategic planning process that take it off the rails. I'm just going to go through them here. So the first one, non-participants in the process don't buy in. And this is why it's important to have the right people in the room as you're doing the process, because if you're part of developing the plan, you have ownership in it and you will be a supporter of it going forward. It's much less effective if the president goes away, does a plan, and then comes back and says, here's my plan, and everybody please fall in line. Well, they don't have the buy-in. So including them in the process and having a really good communication plan as well for how you're going to engage the stakeholders that couldn't or weren't in the room, couldn't be or weren't in the room. Very common thing is that the urgency of the business as usual displaces, the strategically important. And one way to mitigate that is to keep the accountabilities, or put the accountabilities into the leadership KPIs. And if you have a structure where your leadership team has KPIs, maybe even tied to their remuneration or variable comp, you can include some of their accountabilities with respect to the strategic planning initiatives in their KPIs. Lack of follow-up, so it is a problem, a common problem, that a strategic plan is finished, a good job is done of it, but it languishes and sits on the shelf. So you can keep it alive by putting it into the reviews, into your regular meeting schedules with your management team and the people that are stakeholders in the process. And I think that covers really the vision fades with time as well. And then what happens if there's a major change? Something happens to the business, and then you have to recalibrate. There's no way around it. Bottom line is, though, you want your strategic plan to be a working document, or the action plans that come out of it to be a working documents in your organization, not just something that gathers dust on the shelf. Now, I know there's a range of organizations that had signed up for this today. So I don't know if you're watching live or if you'll be seeing this later on a YouTube video. But the approach is a little different depending on the size of your organization. If you have a very significantly large organization, and I'm using the kind of the standard terms for those things, meaning more than $50 million in revenue, more than 500 people, maybe multi-site or multi-region, then you probably will want to do a plan, at least in terms of strategic initiatives, for the master organization, the one that's across all of those locations or touches all of the higher level of the organization, and then separate plans for each of your business lines or locations, maybe even departments if it's depending on the structure of your organization. But if you use a consistent approach across the organization, it'll really help with your communication and reporting as to how you're doing and making progress. For micro and small organizations, so less than 10 million and less than 100 people, and a single site, one plan is will be more than sufficient, with maybe multiple initiatives. So that's what you would be thinking. The third thing, and this is a very important point, is to limit the number of initiatives to what you can realistically do. We've seen it happen a lot, and I try to discourage my clients when we're facilitating. The tendency is to think you can do a lot more than you can, and also to think you can do it a lot faster than you can. So really be cautious about that. Less initiatives done well are better than many initiatives done poorly. You want to bite off what you can chew. I mentioned point 4 already. And point 5 is, communicate. Communicate to all the stakeholders, different forms of communication, repetitive communication. One of the things for us as leaders is to remember, we think we've told people when we've said it once. They probably need to hear it several ways and several times before they really get it. Okay, so that's the end of the theoretical part. Do we have any questions before we go into the exercise?
Yes, there's a couple questions, Brian.
Okay.
So one of them is, the quote, "What gets measured gets done." Do you find that people focus too much on what is easy to measure instead of what is important to measure?
That can be the case. What I always encourage when we're going through that part of an initiative, like how are we going to measure progress, I encourage people to use a metric, a measure that they are already measuring, not to come up with a very complicated and time-consuming measure that that's probably not going to get done because it's so hard to get the parameters that feed into it. So, but you do want it to be indicative. You want your metrics to be indicative of what's important. And aside, strategic planning or not, for your organization, you should have metrics, important metrics, operational metrics in place so that you can be tracking how you're doing in any case, whether you have a strategic plan or not. So try to tap into those as much as possible, so you're not making more work just on reporting.
Mm-hmm. Another question was, what assistance does a medium-sized not-for-profit need to create an effective strategic plan?
Yeah, so not-for-profits. As an example of not-for-profits, I've worked with several churches actually, and of different size. The largest church, which would be a medium-sized organization, I would say, had several sites in Vancouver, and what the support that was needed there was to have representatives from the governing body as part of the process, to have definitely the leaders, the management of the team involved, and in terms of support, I think having an outside facilitator was very helpful to them, or has been. We've been doing it for 5 years with them. It's been very helpful for them because you can keep them out of the weeds and keep the process moving forward. So I don't know if that answers the question well enough, but if not, shoot another line to Jackie and we'll try again.
Mm-hmm. And the last question in the chat is from someone who's a BIA director, and they're wondering how many business owners should be involved in their strategic plan and how to get people interested and wanting to participate in a plan.
Well, if the businesses are independent and touching different customers, different markets, different methods of delivery, then you would need a different plan for each, because you can see that the initiatives would differ depending on what the business line is. And in terms of getting people enthused about it, I would encourage to start with the dreaming session, because people love to dream, and then work from that towards okay, how are we going to make our dreams happen? And dreaming sessions, you can do that over time, maybe in things like having a breakout time every Friday afternoon or whatever time works for you, where the purpose of getting together is only that. It's only to talk about the future, where are we going, and you refuse to talk about operational issues today. Getting that helps to get the excitement going. So people are more than interested to engage.
That's all the questions in the chat for now.
Okay. So let's keep moving along. So we got a strategic planning exercise that I've put together. Again, there's such a diversity in the people that signed up. I'm not going to be able to give examples of every type of, for every type of business, but the principles that I'm going to show here are applicable across the businesses. Or across different types of organizations. As I've mentioned, we've used them, whether it's a for-profit or not-for-profit. This process has been used very, very successfully. What I would encourage you to do, though, is take the templates as we come to those sections in this exercise. Have the templates at hand and be thinking about, what would this mean in the context of my organization? So in this exercise, I'm calling it an abbreviated example because, we just can't possibly do a complete planning session in half an hour. So this is a bit of work. But what we'll do is use an example that gets us, how do you do the where are we now? How do we do the where are we going to, where do we want to be? And start into the how are we going to get there? But we're not going to spend time on how we're going to monitor progress and not actually finish up how we get there either. So, but I think it'll help you. You'll have enough information to get a good start on it. Okay, so this is a fictional company, a construction company called ACDC. Well, that's the short form. It's A1 Construction and Demolition Company. And they started this planning process. And they looked at their own operating parameters, and they're presented here in the 4 perspectives of the balanced scorecard. So just to go through quickly, so you have a sense of what this business is like. Well, it's a family-owned business. Is down in the lower right, lower left-hand corner. The father owns the business. He's 71 years old, and he owns everything. However, his kids are working. 2 of them are working in the business, and 1 is not. The revenue, it's not a big business. It's $10 million a year top line, and not $0.4 million in EBIT. And then I put some things in there about their debt and so on, invested capital. The DSO, that's the efficiency of collecting their use of money. So the time from the time that the work is done until the money's in the bank for them on average is 150 days. And that's increased by 10 days in the last year. In terms of the market that they serve, they're offering these construction and renovation and demolition services pretty much everywhere. So residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial. But you can see that 70% of the business is residential, and of that 70% is renovations. So like half of their business is residential renovations. And overall, 70% of everything is renovation work as well. In terms of how they perform in doing that work, if you compare the project, so the individual project margins versus what they bid versus how they actually perform, they on the residential, they bid at 10% margin, and they actually on average achieve 5%. Jumping down to institutional, they bid, it's a more competitive thing. They bid tight, tighter, but they actually don't make money. And then industrial, and by the way, the first 3 they do on a lump sum basis, so fixed price. Industrial work they've been doing on a time and material basis, and their profitability has been better there, and also their ability to hit their what they bid with their actualities. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the work. In terms of how they market, It's pretty old school. It's word of mouth, print ads, and their relationships in the community. And then in terms of how their customers would view them, based on some survey work that they did, their average survey feedback was 6 out of 10. The positive comments were, very friendly, personable people, and their prices were good at the beginning. The common complaint, though, is that they struggle to meet the schedules. They're late with things, and unanticipated cost overruns. And about 50% of the customers say that they would reuse them on the next project or recommend to a friend. Other aspects as well in terms of their internal processes. On the HSC side, there's all kinds of metrics there, but the total recordable incident rate is 3.2. Industry expectations for them would be definitely less than that, less than 2, probably, maybe even less than 1, depending on which client you want to work for. Their utilization rates, how efficient are they? And this is in terms of how much of the time of these people is actually billable or charged to the projects. So the management's about 30%, workers are 80%. So it means that 20% of the workers' time is actually not productive time, not actually accountable into a project. And their equipment is only 20%. Their productivity factors, that means how efficient are the workers as they're doing their work, is at 60% of a Gulf Coast basis. So if you're an estimator and you're using means estimating guidelines and things, they would have to allow for a lot more time because they're not as efficient as they are in the Gulf Coast, which is normal in Canada. We have a different climate than they do on the Gulf Coast. Field rework, 15%. That means that 15% of the total hours spent on the job are fixing up things that went wrong. And it comes from different places, but most of it is from site errors. So people didn't follow the drawings, or they didn't do things properly in the field. And then in terms of their management tools, very rudimentary management tools, but it's kind of what you would expect for a business of that size. And then organizational capacity, you can see the 35 permanent and 15 temporary staff as the projects come and go. Their staff voluntary turnover is 18%. So that means not planned turnover, like the job's over, sorry, you got to go, and we'll call you when our next job comes in. This is where somebody comes in and says, I'm leaving. And you say, what? I didn't want you to leave. You're one of my valued employees. So it's at 18%, which is a high number. Absenteeism is at 9 days per year on average. And they're facing a shortage of skilled and leadership level of people. And then in terms of their infrastructure, their fleet values there. Average age of equipment is about 5 years. So it's probably been mostly written off. So they have a lot of equipment, is what that tells you. And their equipment downtime is about 15%. So that means it's costing them in their productivity. And the shop space that they have is leased. Okay, so this is again a fictional company, but that's what they found out when they did the metrics of their operation. And then they went into a SWOT, and they looked at the SWOT in this way. So, by the way, on a SWOT, the strengths and weaknesses are existing, as it shows on the left axis there. Opportunities and threats are potential. And it's a common problem where people get confused on what's a strength and what's an opportunity, or what's a weakness and what's a threat. So the strengths are they've been in business quite a while. They're well established, and the owner holds all the debt in the company. So there's not any external debt to think of, except for their line of credit. And the staff are good with customers. The customers like them on a personal level. Some of the weaknesses, though, that we've seen in the stats, high employee turnover. There's a shortage of skilled labor when they need it, low productivity in the field, excessive field work. They're slow on invoicing and collections, and pretty rudimentary management tools and systems. On the opportunity side, it didn't come out in their stats, but it is a growing market, the home renovation market in the Simcoe area. There's a chance, an opportunity for them to increase their industrial work because their performance was better on that. So why not do more of it? They could do more around their work processes and their quality management systems, maybe some training, opportunities for training. And they definitely need to develop a succession plan. So the threats, which these tie together, they could lose big on a lump sum job and take the company down. The owner, it happens, unfortunately. It could pass away, and then what would happen? They don't have a succession plan in place. There could be increasing competition in this area as people move in, other companies move in, or just an economic turn down and the rental market dries up. So that was the SWOT analysis that they came up with.
Before you keep going, Brian, there's a question about, does existing indicate more control and potential indicate less span of control?
No, existing means that it's there today. Potential means that it doesn't exist today, but it could. Okay, so then maybe the statement is correct, because if it exists today, then you know what you're dealing with, and there's a higher possibility to control it and influence it than potential things, because potential doesn't exist. So probably there is a larger measure of control, but it's not what differentiates them. It's whether they exist or they are potential, could potentially exist. That's how you differentiate. Okay, so at the end of the SWOT, again, it was time to reassess the mission, vision, and values for AC/DC. And they realized that they're actually a renovation company. They're specialists. That's their specialty. That's their hedgehog, if you're using the Jim Collins terminology. But the name and their motto didn't reflect that. The motto being, we'll build it for you, and if you don't like it, we'll tear it down. Bad motto. So they decided to rebrand to A1 Renovation Specialists. So it really is indicative of what they do. And their mission, which they had never really clarified before, was our mission is to satisfy our customers by delivering quality renovation projects on time and on budget. Their vision, if they do that successfully over time, is to be Simcoe County's one-stop shop for renovation projects. They want to be the go-to place. And the values that they recognize they're going to need to achieve that is delivering on their commitments, being transparently honest in their dealings, building long-term relationships, both internally and externally, investing in their employees, and being a meritocracy, because remember, this is a family business. And one of the problems with family businesses is that people working there, if it's not a meritocracy, they'll move on because they realize I'm not a family member. My opportunities here are limited, and it's why you can lose good people in a family business. So that was the result of that. So then they did the vision casting session, and the tool here, the ideal versus real gap analysis that I mentioned before. This is a really compact way to capture the vision and your current reality in a comparative way. So they did the vision. So the ideal is the the 5-year vision in this case, and it's dimensioned. So just quickly going through it. So on the revenue side, they were making 10 million. In 5 years, they want to be at 16 million. So whereas their revenue went up by 1% in the last year, in the coming years, it's got to jump to 10% per year. So that's pretty aggressive. Since it's aggressive, that means it's a significant gap. So they rated it at an 8. And again, this is a subjective rating. There's not a lot of math to it. It's just to give you the sense of where the bigger gaps. Their EBIT, their profitability, the 4% today, they want to get that up to 10% in 5 years. And moving your profitability is tough. So that's a 9. That's a big gap. They want to have no debt left. So remember, the debt was privately held. They don't want to have any of that left. So paying that off over 5 years is a priority for them, but it's not as tough a gap as increasing the revenue or getting the EBIT up. And then reducing their days sales outstanding from 150 to 75. That's pretty tough, especially in the construction industry, where things tend to take a while. The money tends to take a while to flow. And then in terms of the ownership structure, which, by the way, you could say, why is that under financial? You can put it in other boxes, and you don't get hung up about what box something is in, but just force yourself to think through those perspectives. But often the stewardship type items, stewardship type items are put in with financial. So the goal is that in 5 years, the transition plan is in place. The next generation has already acquired 50% of the business, and in a way that's equitable to all of the children. And then lastly, on a financial perspective, that the project margins are on average are more than 90% of the bid margins, whereas currently it's at 52%. Okay, so this was their financial part of the ideal versus real. So vision versus actual. How would you prioritize it? Well, they went through and said, we've got to get our margins on our projects improved, because the company performance is a function of how the individual projects do. If we can get them doing better, it's going to flow through to the bottom line of the company. So it's the first priority. Also, improving their use of cash by being more efficient in their invoicing collection process is important. Then, getting the revenue up, because if they've done what I've numbered 1 and 2, then if you can get the revenue up, it's going to really be powerful, having fixed those 2 issues. Getting that transition plan in place, and then working on the debt is kind of the lowest priority. The EBIT is an outcome, so it'll happen if you do the other things in priority. So then you repeat that for your customer piece, and I'll maybe speed it up a little bit because you're getting the idea. But for the customer side, they're a renovation specialist, so they want to increase the percentage of the work that's in renovation in 5 years. Not 100%, because you still want to do other things too and have some diversity, but move it from 70 to 85%. And then the split, keeping increasing the amount in industrial and commercial, and actually getting out of the institutional. So not going to build any more schools or hospitals or that kind of thing, or renovations in them, because they're just not profitable for us. In terms of the customer feedback, they want to move their scores from a 6 to an 8. So they thought that would be pretty challenging. And change the common feedback to, instead of, I don't like the schedules being late and cost overruns, having good feedback on the quality and that they deliver on their commitments. And finally, to move into kind of the 21st century in terms of how they do their marketing. So those are the customer perspective, and then they went through and ranked those as well. Okay. Internal processes. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat, just excuse me. Just needed a good cough to clear that out, hopefully. Yeah, so went through all of their, internal processes that we talked about before, and you can see, getting their total recordable incident frequency down from a 3.2 to a 1. They said that's pretty tough. It's a big gap, so they labeled it an 8. Getting their utilization on their managers to 30% is what they're doing today, so it's no gap. But their workers going from 80 to 95% utilization, that's a significant gap. So they rated it at a 7. And similarly for the equipment. Okay, so you can see, I won't spend time going through them all, but this is what they come up with on their internal processes and prioritize them in this way. So the health and safety of their workers is number 1, which, by the way, 3.2, if you had 35 people, full-time employees in your company, and your TRIF was 3.2, it means that somebody's getting hurt significantly enough that it's recordable once a year. That's what that would mean. So now they're saying if for the same size, it would be there would be less than 1 person every 3 years that had a cut that required stitches or whatever. So it's a pretty daunting task. Okay, so that's the ranking system, and then they did the same thing for the 4th perspective, which is organizational capacity, and rank them this way. So their human capital and their equipment and what they were trying to achieve. So a big part of it is to reduce their turnover and their absenteeism, which both of those tend to be an indicator of engagement, of how engaged and happy your employees are. And they rank them like this. So the first thing was to increase their employee satisfaction in terms of their organizational capacity, because as they recognize that the turnover was causing them in their productivity and in their ability to deliver on their commitments. If they had happy people will deliver better results and in a more efficient way. Okay, so having done that exercise, and they took the top 4 priorities in each of the perspectives and said, what could we do? What initiatives could we do that would really start to close these gaps? And you can see most of the gaps are significant, 8 and 9 out of 10 kind of thing, maybe some 7s and some 6s. So this is now the brainstorming session that says, what are we going to do? It's a clear depiction of where are we now, where do we want to be? What are we going to do? So they did a brainstorming session and came up with 5 initiatives that they wanted to tackle in the first year. The first one was to improve their project planning and execution. The second one was to build a pool of qualified people. And the third one was to grow the industrial project delivery business, and 4th, the commercial project delivery business. And then the 5th one was to get into that ownership and management transition plan. So if you take those 5 initiatives and see what would they impact, primarily impact in terms of their priorities, you can see that they will have significant impacts on virtually all of the things that they're trying to work on, all the gaps that they're trying to close. The 2 that are kind of missed here would be, there's nothing about the marketing, like how are they going to move into the 21st century? So maybe that got deferred until the next year's plan. So they made a calculated decision. Yeah, we know it's important. It was the most important thing. But we're going to focus a little bit on other things this year because we can't do everything at once. Okay, so it's going to impact their entire, most of the gaps that they've identified. Okay, once they've identified what the initiatives are going to be, they need to then take those initiatives to action plans, and that's the last part of the 4th step. So again, there's templates that were provided with your acceptance of the invitation for this session, that you work through. If you work through these templates, it breaks the initiative down into the action plans that are behind them. So the first section is, well, I'll go through it with the example. So it's what is the name of the initiative? So I just took the first one, the improve project planning and execution. Who would the champion be for that? Who's the person in the company that's going to own this initiative and make sure that it happens? The way I characterize this is, one hand to shake and one neck to wring. So it's the person who really will own it. They don't do it all, but they own it. The objectives and challenges are a critical part of this template. If you do a really good job of listing all the things that you're trying to achieve with the initiative and all the challenges that you think it's going to face, then your actions will almost fall out of that exercise, because you can go back and say, if I do these things, will I have, and I'm successful in my actions, will I have addressed my objectives and my challenges? And if you haven't, then you add more actions until you have. So again, I didn't do a comprehensive list. Usually the objectives part would fill the page by itself, and same thing with the challenges. But in this case, projects, the objective is that projects are well planned before they hit the field and incorporate learnings from past projects, best-in-class performance, and ultimately increase project profitability and so on. The challenges, it's a competitive market. The leadership that we have are doers, not planners, and this is going to require more planning. So you need to think about how you're going to get there. And then once you've done that, you then look at what are the actions I'm going to do. So you can see that before you start saying, what am I going to do in terms of action, there's a lot of steps to go through first to make sure you come up with the right actions. So in this case, the action was, train project managers using a PMI approach. Now, that's a pretty broad action. It doesn't say what the training is. It doesn't say, who or any detail. That would all be a sub-plan to this action. But the person responsible would be the manager of projects in this case, supported by HR. And he's going to start in February and finish by the end of March. So you got a 2-month window to get that done. The second action, let's create some standard work processes, templates, and KPIs for project management that we're going to use, because it'll help us be more efficient and do better work. So again, the manager of projects will be responsible, supported by the project managers or construction managers. They're going to start that on January 1 and figure it's a 6-month effort to put that together. Third thing, we're going to track project performance starting as soon as we get them, maybe even before we get them, when we get the bid is in, start thinking about that. And so that would be manager of projects, supported by the project managers, starting on January 1, and it's an ongoing thing that would never end, and so on. So again, you would end up with as many actions as you think are necessary to achieve the objectives and overcome the challenges for the initiative.
Ryan, just pause for a question.
Yes.
From the chat. So about the objectives at the top.
Yeah.
The first question is, do the objectives have to be SMART, S-M-A-R-T, which I think they're referring to, like specific, measurable, realistic with timelines? Do they have to be those type of objectives?
It's obviously better if they are, but when in my experience doing this and facilitating this, I prefer to get all of the ideas in the room, and then you can cull them and organize them and use more of that format. But it's a bit of a brainstorming thing, a green light session where there are no wrong answers. So you don't want people to be thinking, is this smart or not? You just want to get the things out and then do that exercise as a refinement of the initial cut.
Mm-hmm. And related to that, is there an optimal number of objectives?
No, I would say you want to be as fulsome as possible about what you're trying to achieve directly, primarily directly, but even indirectly from this initiative. The more fulsome you are, the better it'll be when it comes to the actions and proofing whether your actions will meet your objectives or not.
That's all from the chat for now.
Okay, thank you. The next section of the template is about measuring. Is about messaging. And there will be different stakeholders that are impacted by the initiative. What you want to do is identify who's impacted, and then what is my message to them going to be. So in this case, you're going to be impacting your project managers, you're going to be impacting your company shareholders and your customers. So you would come up with, what is it I want them to understand about this initiative so that they're on side. So I put in some examples of how that could look. Communicating those messages is another separate exercise. So the communication plan, but at least if you've identified what the key messages are to those stakeholders and everybody in the room understands those messages, you'll be speaking with one mouth as you come out of the planning session. That builds confidence in the organization. Whereas if you don't have common messaging and people come to their manager and say, why are we doing this? And everybody gets different answers, it'll undermine the confidence that the leadership has clear direction and knows what they're doing. The next section is about the resources required. And I mentioned before, I really recommend to do this kind of thing in the context of your fiscal plan. And then you can incorporate whatever costs are associated with the initiative in your budget. And there's probably an approval cycle that has to do with that if in most larger organizations in any case. So in this case, you got a consultant for some training, upgrading some tools, and et cetera. So then you would add that up. And then the last section of the template is about measuring. How are you going to measure success? This can be as complicated or as simple as you like. I think I mentioned before, if you can use metrics that you're already tracking as part of your operations to be indicative of success, then that would be awesome. For this example, improve project performance, they landed on 3. The percentage of projects that are on budget, which it would be calculated as the number of projects that are on budget divided by the total number of projects times 100%, right? So simple calculation. Same thing on schedule. So how many of them are on schedule? And then the average score in their customer satisfaction survey, because remember, that was the other big part of the project performance. And what are the targets? So you have targets for each of those. And then at the bottom, well, I put the definitions in here. What does green, yellow, and red mean? But if the targets are green, it means things are going as you planned. Generally, things are going pretty well. If things are red, it means this initiative is off the rails. It's not working, and we need to do something. So red means I've got to take action as the owner of this initiative, and something has to change. Yellow is in between. So when you're doing this process, you set what your green is, you set what your red is, and then yellow is whatever's in between. And then the last little bit here is, who's going to be doing the collecting and analysis of the metrics, and how often are you going to report them out? Okay. Any questions? Okay, so I mentioned this is not the complete exercise because there would be more steps. So you do the same thing for all of the initiatives that you've come up with. And then you need to monitor your progress. that would be done through, your regular, including the topic in your regular leadership meetings. I really encourage you to include it in leadership KPIs. And again, if you have a variable comp component in your leaders' remuneration, it's a great way to it's something that you can incorporate in that and make it targeted, as opposed to at the end of the year just looking back and on a discretionary basis awarding bonuses. And again, reporting out, so powerful. If it holds everyone accountable. And then recalibrate for year 2 when you come to the end of 1. Or if there's been a major disruption en route, you could recalibrate through the year as well. But typically, an annual recalibration will be sufficient. Okay, and that's the end of the presentation. So any remaining questions?
There's nothing in the chat right now, but obviously our contact information is here to reach out to us directly after today if you have questions unique to your organization.
Yeah, I think Tiffany also mentioned that if you had questions that you didn't have a chance to ask, you can send them in, and they'll come to us, and we'll do our best to give you a good response. And a prompt response.
Oh, sorry. One question just came in asking if we're able to use these slides to set the stage for a strategic planning event.
Yeah, the handouts we've provided to you, and you can use them. Yes, as well as the templates that we provided. We have more templates, of course, and there's a bit of a how-to that's involved with facilitating and getting the best results. If you can afford it, we do encourage you to use a facilitator, whether it's us or not. Obviously, we would love to help, but having an outsider facilitate, if they're a skilled facilitator, can add a huge amount of value. So.
All right, looks like that's all the questions. So thank you all for attending today's session. A couple of things to note before we close. A survey will be sent by email along with a recording of the session after the event. So please watch for that and let us know what you thought. If you're interested in hearing more from experts, information about the series can be found at simcoe.ca/askanexpert. And thank you again to Brian and Jackie for your presentation and your time today. And thank you to all of the partners involved in making these sessions a success. Wishing everyone a fantastic rest of the day and week, and take care and stay safe.
Thanks for having us, Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for everyone who participated.